It was soft at first, tentative, but the moment our lips touched, something inside me ignited. He responded immediately, his hand sliding around my waist to pull me closer. The kiss deepened and I felt myself losing control, giving in to the desire that had been building since the first time I saw him. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart racing and my mind spinning. "What are we doing?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Before we start, thank you for coming to my channel. Your participation is my happiness. Let me know where you are and what time it is now." Okay, now let's get into the story. At 52, I had settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm. My days were filled with work, the occasional book, and the comforting monotony of a life that no longer held surprises, or so I thought. That all changed one rainy afternoon when a leaky pipe under my kitchen sink decided to rebel against my peaceful existence. I had tried to fix it myself, but after an hour of futile twisting and turning, I admitted defeat. Reluctantly, I called a local plumbing service. The woman on the phone assured me someone would be there within the hour. I wasn't prepared for who showed up at my door. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find a man standing there, his tool bag slung over one shoulder. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a rugged handsomeness that immediately caught me off guard. His dark hair was damp from the rain and his eyes, a striking shade of green, seemed to pierce right through me. He wore a simple gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms dusted with faint tattoos. "Hi, I'm Jake," he said, his voice deep and warm, like the rumble of distant thunder. "I'm here to fix your leak." I blinked, momentarily thrown by his presence. "Oh right. Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him pass. He moved past me, and I caught a faint whiff of his cologne, something earthy and masculine that made my stomach flutter. He knelt in front of the sink, his movements confident and efficient as he inspected the problem. I hovered nearby, unsure of what to do with myself. "So, how long have you been a plumber?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. He glanced up at me, a small smile playing on his lips. "About 10 years now. It's honest work, and I like fixing things." His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary, and I felt a strange heat rise to my cheeks. "That's good," I stammered, suddenly feeling self-conscious. I wasn't used to feeling this way, especially not around someone so much younger than me. Jake couldn't have been more than 30, and yet there was something about him, something magnetic, that made it hard to look away. He turned back to the sink, his hands working deftly to tighten a connection. "You live here alone?" he asked casually, though there was a hint of curiosity in his tone. "Yes," I replied, folding my arms across my chest. "It's just me." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's a nice place. Quiet. Peaceful." "It is," I agreed, though my heart was anything but peaceful at the moment. I couldn't explain why, but having him here in my kitchen felt dangerous. Like he was unraveling something I had worked so hard to keep buried. After a few more minutes, he stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "All done. Should hold for a while. But if you have any more issues, just give us a call." "Thank you," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I walked him to the door, my mind racing with thoughts I had no business entertaining. As he stepped outside, he turned to me, his green eyes locking onto mine. "You know," he said, his tone casual but his gaze anything but. "If you ever need anything else fixed, you can call me directly." He reached into his pocket and handed me a business card with his personal number scrawled on the back. I took it, my fingers brushing against his, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Good. I'll be around." And with that he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, clutching his card and wondering what on earth had just happened. The days after Jake's visit felt like a blur. I tried to go about my usual routine: work, errands, the occasional evening walk, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him. That business card he'd given me sat on my kitchen counter, taunting me every time I passed by. I told myself it was ridiculous. He was just being polite, professional. But the way he had looked at me, the way his voice had dropped when he said, "I'll be around," it lingered in my mind like a song I couldn't shake. A week later, the sink started acting up again. A slow drip turned into a steady stream, and I knew I had to call someone. I stared at Jake's card for what felt like an eternity before finally picking up the phone. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, and when he answered, his voice was warm and familiar. "Jake speaking," he said, and I could almost hear the smile in his tone. "Hi, it's me. From the other day. The sink's leaking again," I said, stumbling over my words like a nervous teenager. "I'll be there in 20, he replied without hesitation. And just like that, my heart was racing all over again. True to his word, Jake arrived promptly. This time he was wearing a black hoodie with the sleeves pushed up, and his hair was slightly messy, as if he'd been in a hurry. He greeted me with that same easy smile, and I felt my cheeks flush as I led him to the kitchen. "Looks like the connection loosened up again," he said, kneeling down to inspect the pipes. "I'll tighten it up, but you might want to consider replacing this section soon. It's getting old." "Okay," I said, nodding. I leaned against the counter, trying to act casual, but my eyes kept drifting to him. There was something about the way he moved, confident, deliberate, that fascinated me. I couldn't help but notice the way his muscles flexed under his shirt as he worked, or the faint scent of his cologne that seemed to fill the room. "So," he said after a moment, glancing up at me, "do you always watch Plumbers this closely, or am I just special?" I froze, caught off guard by his teasing tone. I wasn't," I stammered, but he cut me off with a laugh. "Relax, I'm just messing with you," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "But seriously, you're staring pretty hard. Something on your mind?" I didn't know how to respond. My heart was pounding, and my mind was a jumble of conflicting thoughts. He was younger than me, a stranger, and yet there was something about him that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I feel like there's something here. Something I can't explain." He stopped what he was doing and looked at me, his expression serious now. "I feel it too," he said quietly. "I've felt it since the moment I walked through your door." The air between us grew heavy, charged with an electricity I couldn't ignore. He stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, and took a step closer. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, and my breath hitched as he reached out, his fingers brushing against my arm. "This is crazy," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I don't even know you." "You don't have to," he said, his voice low and steady. "Sometimes you just have to trust what you feel." I wanted to argue, to tell him this was wrong, that I was too old, too cautious, too everything for something like this. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my body betraying the rational part of my mind. And then, before I could stop myself, I kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, but the moment our lips touched, something inside me ignited. He responded immediately, his hand sliding around my waist to pull me closer. The kiss deepened, and I felt myself losing control, giving in to the desire that had been building since the first time I saw him. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, my heart racing and my mind spinning. "What are we doing?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He smiled, his thumb brushing against my cheek. "Something that feels right," he said simply. And for the first time in years, I didn't argue. I just let myself feel. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions I hadn't felt in decades. Jake and I didn't talk about what had happened in the kitchen, not directly at least. But there was an unspoken understanding between us, a tension that hung in the air every time we were together. He came by a few more times under the guise of checking on the pipes, but we both knew the truth. It wasn't the sink he was there to fix. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake showed up unannounced. I opened the door to find him standing there, a bottle of wine in one hand and a hesitant smile on his face. "I thought you might like some company," he said, holding up the bottle. "If you're not busy, that is." I hesitated for a moment, my rational mind screaming at me to say no, to close the door and end this before it went any further. But the look in his eyes, soft, hopeful, and just a little vulnerable, made it impossible to refuse. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him pass. We sat in the living room, the bottle of wine between us, and talked for hours. He told me about his life, how he'd grown up in a small town, how he'd always loved working with his hands, how he'd never quite found a place where he felt he belonged. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone in years, sharing stories about my past, my dreams, my regrets. As the night wore on, the space between us seemed to shrink. Our laughter grew softer, our voices quieter, until we were sitting so close that I could feel the warmth of his body against mine. When his hand brushed against mine, I didn't pull away. Instead, I laced my fingers through his, my heart pounding in my chest. "I shouldn't be here," he said suddenly, his voice low and rough. "I know that. But I can't stay away from you." I looked at him, my breath catching in my throat. "I know," I whispered. "I feel the same way." He leaned in then, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. It was different from the first time, slower, more deliberate, as if we were both trying to savor every moment. His hands slid up my arms, leaving a trail of fire in their wake, and I felt myself melting into him. When we finally pulled apart, I was trembling, my mind a jumble of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. "This is dangerous," I said, my voice barely audible. "We're playing with fire." He nodded, his eyes dark with desire. "I know. But sometimes you have to get burned to feel alive." I wanted to argue, to tell him that this couldn't last, that we were too different, that the world would never understand. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I kissed him again, pouring all my fears and desires into that one moment. And for the first time in years, I didn't care about the consequences. I just wanted to feel alive. Thank you for listening to the story so far. Your encouragement means a lot to me. Please comment and share your thoughts here. I love you, and I am so grateful to have you on this journey with me to explore the story further. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered secrets. Jake and I fell into a rhythm, meeting in the quiet hours when the world seemed to fade away. It was reckless, I knew that, but I couldn't bring myself to care. For the first time in years, I felt alive, truly alive, and I wasn't ready to let that go. But as much as I tried to ignore it, the reality of our situation loomed over us like a storm cloud. Jake was young, with his whole life ahead of him, while I was me, a woman in her 50s, set in her ways, with a past that weighed heavily on my shoulders. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all temporary, that sooner or later, he would realize what a mistake this was and walk away. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, I finally worked up the courage to voice my fears. "Jake," I said, my voice trembling, "we need to talk." He turned to me, his expression serious. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been thinking the same thing." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Whatever this is, it can't last. You know that, right? You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. And I'm not. He reached out, taking my hand in his. "Age is just a number," he said firmly. "What matters is how we feel. And I know how I feel about you." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. But what happens when you realize this is a mistake? When you meet someone your own age, someone who can give you the life you deserve. I can't do this if it's just going to end in heartbreak." He was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "I can't promise you forever," he said. "No one can. But I can promise you that right now, in this moment, I want to be with you. And that's enough for me." His words hit me like a punch to the chest, and I felt the tears spill over. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I'm scared of getting hurt. Of hurting you." He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. "I'm scared too," he whispered. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." And in that moment I realized something. I didn't want to let him go. Not now, not ever. Whatever this was, whatever we were, it was worth the risk. The days after our conversation on the porch were filled with a newfound sense of clarity. Jake and I stopped hiding, stopped pretending that what we had was anything less than real. We spent our days together, exploring the city, sharing meals, and talking late into the night. It was as if we were making up for lost time, trying to cram a lifetime of memories into the moments we had. But as much as I tried to push it aside, the fear of losing him never fully went away. It lingered in the back of my mind, a constant reminder that this could all come crashing down at any moment. One evening, as we sat in my living room watching a movie, the storm that had been brewing inside me finally broke. "Jake," I said, my voice trembling, "what happens when this isn't enough?" When you realize that you want more than I can give you. He turned to me, his expression serious. Is that what you're worried about? That I'll leave you? I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't want to hold you back. You deserve so much more than this. He reached out, taking my hand in his. You're not holding me back, he said firmly. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm not going anywhere. His words should have comforted me, but instead they only made the fear worse. But what if you change your mind? I whispered. What if you wake up one day and realize that this was all a mistake? He was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on mine. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but steady. I can't promise you that I'll never hurt you, he said. But I can promise you that I'll never stop trying to make you happy. That's all any of us can do, right? Just take it one day at a time and hope for the best. I wanted to believe him, to let go of my fears and just enjoy the moment. But the weight of my past, of all the times I'd been hurt and let down, was too heavy to ignore. I don't know if I can do that, I admitted, my voice breaking. I don't know if I'm strong enough. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. You don't have to be strong, he whispered. You just have to be here. With me. That's all I need. And in that moment I realized something. I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't have to know what the future held or how this would all end. All I had to do was trust in what we had, in the connection that had brought us together in the first place. So I let go of my fears, if only for a little while, and allowed myself to be in the moment. And for the first time in years I felt truly at peace. The days that followed felt like a delicate balance between fear and hope. I had let go of my fears, or at least I tried to. Jake and I were still walking on a tightrope, the tension of our differences ever present, but softened by the quiet moments we shared. It was strange how something so intense could feel both precarious and right all at once. Then came the day I got the call. I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping coffee when the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut told me to answer. Hello, I said, my voice steady, but my heart was already pounding. Hi, is this Kate? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but I immediately recognized the tone, a bit too formal for my liking. Yes, this is Kate, I said slowly. This is Amanda from a real estate firm, she continued. I'm calling regarding the property you've been renting for the past few years. We've received an offer, and they're quite serious about purchasing it. I froze, my hand tightening around the phone. My house. The place I had called home for so long. The one I'd settled into after my divorce. The one where I had built a life of peace. Had suddenly become part of someone else's plan. What offer? I managed to say. We're talking about a competitive bid. Well above market value. The buyers are eager to close quickly. My stomach turned. I had never intended to leave. This house was a part of me, a place where my past had settled into the walls, where I could find quiet and solitude when I needed it most. Do you have any interest in selling? Amanda asked, her voice neutral, as though she were offering me a choice, when in reality I felt like I had none. No, I said, the word slipping out before I could think it through. I'm not selling. Understood, Amanda replied, though there was a sense of finality in her tone. We'll let you know if there's any further interest. I hung up the phone, my thoughts spinning. What did this mean? Was this a sign? Should I let go of the past, sell my house, and start somewhere new? Or was this just one more thing I couldn't control in a life that already felt like it was slipping away? I sat there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing down on me. And then, almost on cue, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Jake standing there, his expression serious but soft. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand, a rare gesture that made my heart flutter, despite the storm brewing inside me. You're quiet today, he said, his eyes searching mine. Something on your mind? I stepped aside to let him in, my mind racing with a dozen things I couldn't say. The phone call, the uncertainty, the possibility of change. Everything I had feared was bubbling up inside me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to explain it to him. I got a call, I said, my voice shaky. About my house. They want to buy it. Jake frowned, stepping closer to me. You don't want to sell, do you? I shook my head. I don't know. I didn't even think it was a possibility. But now it feels like everything's changing, and I don't know how to handle it. Jake took my hands in his grip warm and steady. Change is scary, he said softly. But you don't have to face it alone. I'm here. I looked up at him, the weight of everything settling in my chest. I don't know what I'm doing, Jake. I've built my whole life around this house, around this routine. What if I make the wrong choice? He reached up and gently cupped my face, tilting it so that our eyes met. You're not alone in this, he repeated. Whatever you decide, we'll face it together. And if you're not ready to let go of this place, that's okay. I'll be here for you no matter what. For a moment, I let his words wash over me, the comfort in his voice grounding me. Maybe I didn't have all the answers yet. Maybe I didn't know what the future held, or how to handle the changes that were coming. But I did know one thing. I didn't have to face it alone. I leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his embrace, and I realized something important. It wasn't the house that made me feel safe. It was the people I chose to keep close. And maybe, just maybe, I had found someone worth holding on to. As we stood there, the weight of the world momentarily lifting, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of something more. Something uncertain but real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed felt like a mix of uncertainty and clarity. After Jake's words, I found myself thinking less about the house and more about what truly mattered. About the connection we had, about the quiet moments we shared, and the promise that I wasn't alone anymore. Still, the call from Amanda lingered in my mind. The house was no longer just a home. It had become a symbol, a choice I hadn't anticipated having to make. Jake and I spent the next few days together, but there was a subtle shift in the air. I could tell something had changed, though neither of us spoke of it directly. We were both navigating this unknown territory carefully, unsure of the next step. The weight of my past, the fear of letting go, hung over me like a cloud. One evening I was sitting on the porch, the faint scent of rain still lingering in the air. Jake joined me holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. His presence was comforting, and I couldn't help but smile as he handed me a glass. I've been thinking, he said, his voice steady but thoughtful, about us, about what's been happening, and about the future. I turned to face him, taking the glass from his hand, my heart racing at the seriousness in his tone. Jake, I said softly, I'm not sure I can keep living like this. I don't want to hold you back. You deserve a life without the complications I bring. He frowned, his eyes searching mine. Kate, don't say that. I'm not going anywhere. I've never felt more alive than I do when I'm with you. But I get it. I understand your fear. I know you're not ready to change everything, to let go of the past. But I'm not asking you to give up anything. I'm asking you to give us a chance. I swallowed, the weight of his words sinking deep. Part of me knew he was right. The life I had built around my routine, my work, my home, had kept me safe from the world and its risks. But in doing so, I had shut myself off from the very thing I now craved, connection. Jake? I began, my voice trembling. I'm scared. I'm scared of taking this leap. What if we're just a moment, something fleeting? What if I end up losing you, or worse, I lose myself in the process? He reached for my hand, gently threading his fingers through mine. You won't lose yourself, Kate. We're not doing this to erase who you are. We're doing this to add something beautiful. Something real. I took a deep breath, feeling the vulnerability of the moment. I've spent so many years afraid of making the wrong choices. And now, with you, I don't want to mess this up. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. Jake's smile was soft, almost tender. Maybe we don't have to know. Maybe we just take it one day at a time. Together. The weight of the moment felt heavier than anything I'd ever faced. In front of me was a man who cared deeply for me, who made me feel seen, heard, and alive. But I was still holding on to the past, to the safety of my routines, to the comfort of what I knew. The house, my life, was all I had ever really known. And yet, this new path, this unexpected twist with Jake, was opening me up to something I never imagined. All right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Let's see where this goes. Jake's face lit up, the intensity of his gaze making my heart race. That's all I ask. We sat in silence, the sound of the evening breeze mingling with the soft hum of the world around us. It felt as though time had slowed, as if the moment we had just shared had frozen in place. The next day I called Amanda back. "I've decided not to sell," I told her, my voice firm. "I'm going to stay in my house." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line, but Amanda's response was understanding. "All right, Kate. Thank you for letting us know. If you change your mind, we'll be here." I hung up, a sense of relief washing over me. The decision felt right, even if it was difficult. I didn't need to make drastic changes in my life to find what I was looking for. I had everything I needed already in front of me. I just needed to take the risk. The following weeks were filled with new beginnings. Jake and I spent more time together, exploring places I hadn't been before, discovering parts of each other's lives that had been hidden in the quiet spaces. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of my past crept up on me, threatening to pull me back. But through it all, Jake was there, steady and unwavering. And slowly I began to realize something important. That love, connection, and living fully weren't about avoiding pain or protecting yourself from heartbreak. They were about embracing the messiness, the uncertainty, and letting yourself be vulnerable. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about the perfect life I had built to shield myself from the world. It was about the people we let in, the risks we take, and the love we allow ourselves to feel. And with Jake by my side, I was learning to trust again. To trust that no matter what the future held, I wasn't alone anymore. The storm had passed, and now I was ready to live in the calm. And that's it for today's story. I'd love to hear what you think. Leave a comment below and share your feelings. Did you relate to any of the characters? Or if you were in their shoes, what decisions would you make? I'd love to hear from all of you. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. And if you didn't, hit one. Subscribe so you don't miss out on more great content. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.